I'll let everybody introduce themselves, but great panel in terms of Joe from Amazon, bringing in the tech and tech provider perspective. Greg from Warner Brothers, sharing from a buyer's perspective what they're doing in terms of making things possible through some of these emerging technologies. Vasily, coming from a digital-first background with experiences at Tesla and Uber, and then Matt, again, coming from an investment perspective, where they advise different companies and clients on their financing needs and their M&A work. So gets a very good perspective on looking at different companies from a different lens. So Matt, you want to go ahead and introduce?
Sure. I'll provide a little background of Drake, since there's probably not all that many people here familiar with the firm, but we are a global TMC-focused investment bank, as well as an investment fund. So we've got offices in 8 countries with over 70 professionals, focused really predominantly on, as was mentioned before, predominantly sell-side and buy-side M&A. So pretty much all we're looking at, TMC stands for Technology, Media, and Communications. So pretty much every deal we do is related to that specific sectors of the market, and obviously the convergence within those markets. The business, obviously, as I mentioned before, has offices around the world, and to date, we've completed about 30 to 35 transactions year to date. As many of you know in the audience, the M&A market globally is obviously doing quite well. There's been over $3 trillion of transactions done in the M&A space sequentially over the last 4 years, and that should probably be exceeded this year. About 20% of that is technology-related M&A, and about another 20% of that is cross-border M&A. So we sit very much right in the middle of all that transaction activity, and certainly it continues to be quite strong, and I'll touch on that as we go forward with the panel.
Thanks, Matt. Vasily?
Yeah, thanks, Akshay, for a great introduction. I'm not going to make it too long. Yes, I'm currently with Tesla doing customer acquisition, before did driver growth for Uber. So I basically try to apply technology to helping customers discover new great things, right? And I guess in the context of this discussion, we're going to talk later about changes those companies are making on transportation industry, and maybe not just transportation, but also job creation industry, product creation, the way companies think about their own organizational structure, et cetera. So I think as panel goes forward, I guess we will develop on those topics, but in the meantime, I'll appreciate if you have questions on this as well.
Thanks, Vasily. Greg?
Well, first and foremost, as representing Warner Brothers, I just want to welcome you to the studio. I hope you're enjoying your day, and we're happy to have you here. My group is called Emerging Technology, a very small team. We focus on evangelizing technology as an element to the rest of the studio that is really, in a lot of ways, disrupting our industry. And for us to understand that it's disrupting and to sort of get ahead of that and find ways in which we can take advantage of that. And there's a lot of different cases of that. We also interface to other studios and other standards consortia to establish standards such as Blu-ray disc and the DVD disc and digital cinema and things of this nature. We also harvest patents in the studios. Most people don't know studios actually file a good number of patents in regard to post-production and distribution of our content. And we have been largely focusing on prototyping with these new emerging technologies to understand the ways in which they're going to affect our various distributions, our business, whether it's feature film, television, gaming, consumer products, themed entertainment, and even some of the new areas where we've acquired other companies such as Machinima. So it's a great area where we're looking at ways in which we can get our characters, our worlds, our IP in your hands and in your experience more through many other ways.
Thanks, Rick. Joe?
Thanks, it's a pleasure to be here. So there's a small team of us at AWS who are former CIOs and CTOs who had led large-scale cloud transformations. I had spent over 20 years at Accenture, and my last tour of duty there was with Accenture IT, where we went through a pretty substantial digital and cloud transformation. So my charter is to work with CIOs and CTOs and just share my experience and best practices for how to leverage the cloud in their respective organizations.
Thanks, Joe. And welcome, everyone, and thanks for being here. So the way I want to structure the panel discussion is broadly in 3 parts. One, how are we seeing transformation happening in the industries? And then, again, from various industries, whether it's on the entertainment side or transportation. Second, what kind of use cases and actual live production examples you are seeing of some of these technologies, whether it's in the AI or machine learning or mixed reality and so on. And third, I think, which is probably very important, I think Gregory also covered in the last session, is how do you build an organization that helps to do that, right? How does an organization help push that change internally and with the other stakeholders as well? So Matt, starting with you, you have a great perspective looking at different companies across the TMC spectrum, large companies, small companies, and advising them on growth capital as well as acquisition. So where do you see major changes? I mean, I'm sure you see it every day. You deal with executives and CEOs and board members, advising them on acquisitions. What are some of the things top of their mind, and along with the disruption in the industry that they're seeing, and how are they responding to it?
I'll probably take that question from a little bit higher level, just because obviously these gentlemen can speak a lot better to the types of opportunities they're looking for within their specific companies. I will say that I know Kevin's talked earlier about digital singularity. I mean, the one thing we're seeing, which is very consistent across the technology ecosystem globally, is obviously from a M&A and finance perspective, you're seeing really convergence across, since we focus on technology, media, and communications, you're seeing those three areas, even though they're typically referred to as sectors that we focus on, along with other investment banks in our space. You're seeing those three come together really across the entire universe of companies.
The hyperconvergence part of it.
Exactly. There's incredible hyperconvergence, and I think a lot of people get nervous about what does that mean for our future? What does that mean for companies in terms of growth? How do we get growth? How do we drive growth? And invariably what that convergence is creating is actually more opportunity, because you're seeing large companies, such as the companies these gentlemen represent over here, looking at opportunities both internally and externally. For a group like us advising these companies, we're seeing tremendous opportunity for both earlier stage companies that are really coming out of nowhere, and you guys have seen this in the news. I mean, there's any number of companies that have gone from zero to billions of dollars in enterprise value really in a matter of years, which was unheard of 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago. So what's amazing now is, even though people feel quite concerned about what's going on, generally with all these very fast developing technologies, whether it's IoT, whether it's AI or VR, et cetera, just one thing after another keeps coming and coming. There's an amazing opportunity right now, particularly for the areas we're in, and for those people who are out there looking to expand technologies and looking to take different opportunities within the market and build a company around it. And then more often than not, there's no shortage of capital out there for good ideas and good execution to be acquired, both by strategics, such as some of the gentlemen here, as well as by just financial investors who are looking at these overall trends in the market. So it's an amazing moment in time right now in terms of what's going on in the M&A market.
Yeah, the dynamism and kind of the pace of change kind of really helps kind of pushing the agenda for executives to look at either providing growth capital or acquiring some of these companies, right? So
yeah, that's correct. And as we talked a little bit before, I mean, I think invariably one of the things that everyone's looking at that we deal with, and then some of the companies we deal with are smaller in terms of size. Generally, the smallest company we deal with is about 50 to 60 million of enterprise value. A lot of these companies, it's really just based on the intellectual property. If you don't have something that truly sets you apart in terms of intellectual property, the likelihood as an earlier stage company you're going to be acquired for a high value is pretty low. You're not seeing companies like you would 20, 30, 40 years ago just get acquired purely for the book of business or purely for the transactional enterprise value that may add to a public company. Those days are somewhat gone, and so now what you're seeing is companies with tremendous IP that have been developed, and even in some cases pre-revenue, that are being acquired for very, very high multiples, largely because either a large strategic and or financial buyer sees that as a trend, and they know that they have to own that company.
Right. So, Greg, I want to turn over to you. How do you see this spanning out in the entertainment industry?
Well, it's funny. I was just going to jump in, but I didn't want to interrupt. A case in point would be years ago, our focus on broadcasters and then the over-the-top streaming and binging, which is a whole different use case. The thing that I think that we've found that's most important is to follow what the consumer is doing and what the consumer values, and then look for the companies that actually can meet that value, because it might very well be a different way than you're expecting based on your potentially traditional view. I mean, tradition, we always think of that's old, but we're in a tradition right now. Netflix binging is a tradition for our time. It may not be 5 years from now, but we always have a framework. We look at things, and so we have done quite a bit of analysis of the changing use patterns of our consumers by demographic. For instance, looking at millennials versus plurals, very different use cases, very different needs and driven. You look at your 10-year-old child and how they consume content, and you look at a 25-year-old college student, and then you look at a 45-year-old adult. It's very different use patterns. So the use patterns are going to drive what is the technology, what are the needs of that to create that kind of a value chain, and then look for the companies, to Matt's point, look for the companies that actually have IP and value that can read on that.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I think it always starts with the customer. I mean, it has to. Otherwise, if the customer relevancy is not there, then you're just solving, a problem that probably doesn't need solving. And on that topic, I think, again, Uber and Tesla, again, very customer-obsessed companies. So how do you see this, and in transportation sector, with autonomous vehicles, with Uber, it's under a massive shift. So how do you see that in the transportation sector?
Yeah, thanks, Akshay. It's a great question, and I want to first reference the keynote where you saw the slide. It's kind of pretty scary slide, which shows 10 people make as much money as 3.5, I guess, billion not so successful people, and I guess it's 400 billion net worth, if I'm not mistaken, on the left and on the right. So from this perspective, I actually want to bring Uber into the conversation as a really nice company, and actually acts against this evil digital force, right? Because Uber is being seen as an evil company by many people, that it's kind of taking advantage of its drivers, etc. But I actually want to take a chance and reference the keynote and just make you think about it. Like, if 3.5 billion people altogether are only worth as much as top 10 people in the United States, basically just in the west coast of the United States. I don't think there was anyone from the east coast on that list. So what is the impact that companies are making on the positive side? So and Uber is a great example. This company shipped close to $40 billion, I guess, to our drivers in 2017, right? If you just look at financial performance, maybe not making money for investors yet, but definitely making lots of money for, again, people on this other side of the spectrum. Yeah. And 40 billion is actually quite comparable number to 400 billion. So just one company in just 1 year is making change to this whole equation of like absolutely fantastic way. Yeah. So when you think about it this way, you can see that just single company can be making pretty profound changes to like millions and millions of people's lives. And taking it to the micro level, even in the US, like the richest country by far in the world, if you need to pay, say, $500 for a doctor's appointment or some kind of unexpected expense, I guess the number I've heard is 70-ish% people would need to go borrow from the friends or some kind of loan. So $400 with Uber you can make in like half a week, I guess, or something. So it basically gets your budget constraints, does not remove them, but makes them a lot softer. And makes the economy, I would say, a lot better functioning, right? Like where previously you had an intent and capability to make money, you just were not able, there's not job opportunities for you. So there's a lubricant now, which is Uber is this type of lubricant, Airbnb is this type of lubricant. If you can put the airbag on your floor, then you can make, again, $50 a night or something. So that's, from my standpoint, one of the biggest contributions of those companies into the economy, not even the digital economy, while all of us think of it as just a convenient rides. So that's probably the most revealing piece for me after all these years.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also ties into what Kevin talks about in his book and in his keynote as well, the trend towards moving towards the gig economy and the enterprise of one. So any individual, whether they're sitting, here in LA or in Indonesia or Costa Rica, they could be a designer, a graphic artist, or whatever work that they're doing, and through the power of internet, they have the ability to contribute and work on any assignment anywhere, pretty much, right? So I think that's one of the beautiful things that Uber has created. Joe, I know you, as part of your role, work with many CIOs and CTOs on a regular basis, looking at understanding what their challenges are. So how are they coping up with everything that is coming at them, from incumbents in their own industry, as well as these startups and smaller companies?
Yeah, a lot of the folks that I talk to are under tremendous pressure. I don't really envy their situation, because there's pressure to be innovative, faster, more agile, to do it with less, and to do it with more security. So it's a really tall order. So I have a tremendous amount of sympathy for them. The way we're trying to help from an Amazon Web Services perspective is to try to take away from a lot of the undifferentiated heavy lifting so that they can focus on the things that matter to their business. I think the challenge that a lot of folks are facing are multiple fold. One is just, how do you just kind of break away from the paradigms? Oftentimes I'll use an architectural reference. It's like we're sort of in this brick and mortar phase, and companies like Amazon and others are providing a whole new set of materials and technologies to allow companies to reimagine commerce and customer experiences. But if you look at one of the first high-rises, which is in Chicago, if you look at it, it doesn't look like a high-rise. It looks like a brick-and-mortar building. And so I think we're in this kind of transition where people are still learning to use these materials. And then I think the other vector of change that is really difficult is that in using these new materials, you need different kinds of skills, organizational paradigms, so that you can make best use of these tools and technologies to completely reimagine these experiences. So, that's to me what's ahead of us. But I think the exciting opportunity, and what I'll use oftentimes for companies just to start opening up their imagination, is to share what happened with Major League Baseball and their advanced media group. So Joe Inzarello, who's their CTO, Major League Baseball was faced with this challenge with fan engagement, viewership declining. They invested in a number of different kinds of cool things like StatCast, but one of the things they invested in is in an over-the-top technology content delivery platform, and which they did build on AWS, and they did relatively quickly. And what they found is that they built such a great platform that companies like Hulu and HBO were coming to them and saying, hey, can we use that platform? And just last year, they sold that business to Disney. They sold BAMTech to Disney for, I think, all told, around $3 billion, including some of the initial investment. So, here's this business that's about serving up content around athletics that turned around and created a different kind of business and sold that off. So I think that's kind of what the art of the possible is. And what our hope is that all businesses of all shapes and sizes will be able to take advantage of those kinds of capabilities.
Right, great.
If I could add one point there, because you actually brought up a great point about AWS and what we're seeing on the AWS side in terms of service providers servicing that specific market. And we've seen just a dearth of companies started really in the last 3 to 4 years supporting AWS integration platforms for companies. And these companies are getting sold at incredible multiples. So you're seeing these companies that evolve literally out of nowhere off of AWS who would not have existed 10 years ago, requiring that type of infrastructure spend in order to support that type of platform to then take out the consumer base. Now it's readily available. They're basically just acting as integrator to the private companies out there that need these kind of low-cost budget platform services. They're getting great margins from their end consumer for that product, and they're creating these businesses really out of nowhere. And we've sold probably 4 or 5 of those companies in the last 2 to 3 years. And generally speaking, they're being sold for anywhere from 2 to 3 times revenue, not EBITDA, revenue. So companies are coming in and acquiring their very high multiples because they know that's the future, and that, hey, if you've got 12 clients, I know you can turn that into 50, and it's really just a matter of doing the math in terms of where you're going to invest in that company. So it's I think, a great example of what's going on in just the general technology market and how that convergence is creating opportunities for entrepreneurs who are just taking advantage of it and really don't have to put out huge amount of their own capital or third-party capital to build these businesses.
No, and just to add to Matt, I think what companies like Amazon are doing with making these tools and technologies available is really making it, democratized, right? So a high school student in India, has the same access that an enterprise has in terms of building and using some of the cutting-edge work that Amazon is building, whether it's in NLP or ML. And that really kind of removes all barriers of where the innovation could come from. It could come in from, Israel or Indonesia or anywhere, pretty much, right?
I'm a client as well, so thank you. It's a great product.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
So Greg, I know you guys are doing, from a customer experience, immersive experiences, obviously Warner Brothers is doing a ton of stuff. So anything you want to share from, what you guys are doing in the mixed reality? I know we have a demo going on here. How do you kind of bring that into play?
Sure. A couple of years ago, when everyone took notice that Facebook spent a couple $1 billion for a company called Oculus, one of the questions that we posed to ourselves was we had an existing very strong game business, and of course we have film and television, And if you think about our business, it's all about the IP. We want to provide you more opportunities to experience interaction with Harry Potter and go to Hogwarts or whatever, Batman and the DC world. So we looked at it as saying, is this now another way that we can provide a different type of experience that's not necessarily a video game and not necessarily a passive experience of watching a movie in a theater or television? And what does VR, and for that matter, augmented reality, or the mixture of those in the physical world, look like coming towards the future? And how are people going to want to experience that? So we've done a lot of things. We've done video capture, 360 video. There was a partnership with Samsung on the Suicide Squad. There was a piece that we did together, and it was taken to Comic-Con. We've done a recent launch with IMAX and put an ancillary experience in their experience centers of the theaters to promote and actually take a transaction related to the film's introduction. And we're looking at what's called location-based VR. Some of you might have experienced this with our sister studio, or not sister studio, our competitor down the street, Disney, did with Star Wars at Downtown Disney, and now even over here at the Glendale Galleria with The Void, where you spend a transaction fee and you go into an experience for 12 minutes and you're in the movie, if you will. And so we're looking at a lot of these ways in which to provide those experiences and looking at all the business metrics around that. And my group looks at some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. So in other words, in order to get those assets to create those kinds of experiences, we need to look at the asset creation and pipeline, the acquisition, the creation through feature film. And it's not quite as trivial as just take the stuff that's beautiful on the silver screen and put it over in a game engine. There's a lot more detail involved in that. And so we've been doing quite a bit of work to understand the workflows and how we can automate that and take advantage of all those very rich assets that we create for one distribution and leverage those into other distributions. We're opening a theme park in Abu Dhabi this year. So there are just more ways in which we're trying to take these technologies and provide experience opportunities for our fan base to spend more time with the IP. And if you think about this notion of the art of possible, several of us years ago would never have thought that we could provide, beyond, say, one of the first Harry Potter movies, an opportunity for someone to spend time on a Facebook page or an Instagram page to spend time with Harry Potter. We wouldn't have thought of that as a critical element of the overall franchise, but now that's commonplace today. And so we realize that the technology just provides a medium by which we can provide value to the consumer. And we look for the ways we can piece that together. Blockchain is another technology that we're looking at. There's an area of blockchain called smart contracts where we could potentially take some human intervention out of a process of managing a business relationship over time through a smart contract. We're starting to understand and look at that. We have digital supply chains of all the many assets that we create, metadata, languages, localization, that we have to manage all that massive amount of data, and it's a digital supply chain. So blockchain and/or artificial intelligence in a very holistic sense, we're looking at that technology of ways in which to drive cost out of those processes.
I think we're seeing a lot of action there in terms of using smart contracts for things like patents, and so that lends itself very well to that. Matt, do you see companies starting to leverage blockchain, startups?
Well, actually, as you were mentioning the smart contracts, we've actually seen a number of companies in that space recently, and there's one I was actually meeting with in Barcelona, specifically around that concept. And obviously, there's certain industries which could definitely use it. One of them is certainly communications industry, particularly those that are regulated. You've got such an incredible amount of regulation that's part of that industry that's just ingrained in it and has been for decades. And that technology just totally changes that game. Right. The ability to contract quickly and securely, and things that used to take, and I know from personal experience because I own a communications company that is regulated, to take that technology to really the masses who are in that specific space is an enormous change, really, of how people do business day to day. So it's not just, hey, this is great to drive enterprise value, reduce costs. It changes the way you do business.
It's a 10x difference.
That's right? 10x. It's not, I'm spending 30 hours or 40 or 50 hours this week just on this one contract. It's all right, the contract's done in 10 minutes, and now I can focus on my business.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Vasily, I think companies like Uber and Tesla, Heavily data-driven businesses generate tons and tons of data. So, can you share with us in terms of any AI or machine learning uses that you see in Uber?
Yeah, so actually I want to make 2 points and build on Greg's what's possible argument. It's quite interesting how much stuff becomes possible that we could not even think before. And again, I'm not talking specifically about Uber, like you can get a ride, you couldn't get a ride. Okay, it's amazing, but there is a lot more profound stuff happening which is not as obvious, so probably going to go a little bit deeper in the details. So if you think about how we build products, how we think about products as, for instance, product managers and customers, right? Originally, like the view was the product manager is basically king, like the person runs the company as a CEO, makes all the decisions, gets the engineers pumped, and then consumer basically just consumes, right? You just consume and if you like it, you use it. If you don't like it, you don't use it. And that was the world up until, I don't know, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years from now. So what's changing right now is first, data availability is becoming so vast and so cheap, right? There is a lot more devices. Those devices are a lot more user-friendly, so people engage with them a lot more, right? They watch more videos, they spend even more time on Facebook, although I didn't even think it's possible. So with all of this time spent in activity, so PMs now are even a lot more powerful running the experiment. So the whole concept of experimentation is not new, but it's coming to life, again, basically within the last 10 years, and I think it's more vividly coming to life within even the last 5, because the mobile data is just growing so visibly fast. So now, previously you could not identify consumer behavior changes like 1% or 2%, right? Like you would just not even know if I change the color on Google of the button, maybe you will know that people react, right? But on any less visited website, you wouldn't know. So these days it's possible. If you want to know what's going to change if I introduce this small feature, right. You can do it, you can iterate, and you can maybe run an experiment within sometimes days, sometimes seconds, sometimes maybe for more challenging ones, weeks, but it's not years. And the important consequences, so back to the 2 points. First point is the way we do product, it's probably not good for me, but I actually feel like you're losing power as a PM from some standpoint, right? So now you have to listen to the customers, and in many cases, like you just want to do your stuff, right? You have passion, you want to build certain feature, but now the market keeps you a lot more disciplined. It's good for shareholders, it's good for society, it's good for customers. It's also good for PMs, but it's not so easy to realize, right?
You're losing your power. For the PMs, right?
Right. And I think actually, I'll just share, I think the good thing Uber has done from the product management standpoint, for you to be successful, 2 things must happen, and I've not seen it in any other companies yet. Maybe Amazon, we can discuss if Amazon does it this way or some other companies. So you have to both ship great products and you have to keep your engineers. If one of those things is not happening, you will be basically like kicked out, you'll be fired pretty soon, right? So if you're not shipping good products, obviously you're a bad PM, you need to be fired. But even if you're shipping good products and your engineers are not happy for some reason, et cetera, in the switching teams, basically there is no way for you to move forward in the organization. So you have to be solving for both of those. Right. And it also makes you, again, engage with soft power more than like through, say, hard power. Instead of just putting it on your team and let's get it done. It's another lever which makes you listen to the market and to your team. And again, finally, to not make it too long, the way we think about the company structure, right? Like there is a CEO, there is a CFO, like as soon as you raise VC round, VC comes and says, now you need to hire this, you need to build up this team. So it's kind of mechanical, right? People haven't spent much time thinking about like, why are we doing this? Like maybe this team needs to be, maybe we don't need a CFO. Maybe we don't even need CTO. Like we're like, why are we doing this? Not clear. So one example, for instance, Uber has done is once you get vast amounts of data, you start understanding like, okay, your customer service org is actually really important for this company. You think of Uber as an app which is like a mechanical, it lets you engage with drivers in a like automated way, but in fact, we're a huge customer service company. If you ever got billed the wrong amount, I guess you reached out and said, hey, give me my $5 back for a cancellation fee or for something else. There is tens of thousands of people behind, right? There is lots of people involved. So the customer service department has been elevated due to, again, the amount of information we got and how much influence it has on our top line and bottom line. And also on the product side, lots of companies do growth, right? It's fashion, like it's high fashion. Everyone likes the growth function. But if you think about consumer, like, does consumer care? I really don't. Like, I don't care if you grow or you don't. It's
all part of the product. Yeah.
Right. So what I've observed again with Uber, this whole function stopped to exist, right? And it does exist with Facebook these days, but I don't think it does exist with many other mature companies. So companies actually move on like from this whole growth mentality and they focus on customer needs, and growth is not one of their needs. It's your selfish need. So companies kind of get more disciplined and start thinking about it in a little bit more philosophical terms.
That kind of gets to the symbiotic relationship between the consumer and the producer. and I think that the keynote this morning talked about that when it came to the American Airlines bumpy flight.
Yeah, yeah.
The fact is that there's an opportunity now to get such better feedback that it now becomes a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, it's almost imperative for you to consider it. So I want to quickly, use the last few minutes. And Joe, maybe there are some lessons to be learned from, how Amazon operates. And, a lot of people would be aware of the two-pizza rule that Amazon has, no PowerPoints at Amazon. So how does Amazon build that culture of moving fast and kind of bringing shipping products very quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I share this story quite a bit. As you might imagine, there are a fair number of folks who wonder how Amazon is able to do what it does, and a lot of it is there's certainly a technical component, but I look as I understand it, back in the early 2000s, there was a pretty big bottleneck that Amazon hit in terms of organization, in terms of decision making, in terms of technology platform, and one of the things that I share a lot with customers is just that we did a major organizational refactor to these two-pizza team concepts. So if you haven't heard of that, basically you shouldn't have a team that can't be fed by more than two pizzas. So ideally, a two-pizza team would be a team of one, and at its largest, it would be a team of like 10, based on kind of the surveys that I've done. The other important characteristics around those teams is that they're completely independent. So, one of the stories that you'll hear Andy Jassy talk about is, when they were trying to launch the third-party marketplace, you'd have to have like 30 people around the table. Can I do this feature launch? And you're like, no, I'm doing this feature launch. And basically, just realization that that's just not going to work. So these teams are completely independent. So the goal is to refactor that team to such a degree that any decision that's made is confined within the realm of that team, without having to engage really with anyone else. And the way that kind of manifests itself is we talk about these experiments. There's something like 50 million deployments or changes being done to Amazon.com on a yearly basis. Yeah. So that's the speed in which teams can operate. If you go to a product detail webpage, if you're an Amazon customer, there's something like 200 to 400 service calls made to compose that experience, with over 120 teams responsible for the different components of those pages, whether it's the button, the advertisements, and whatnot. And each of those teams have the ability to make a change, to launch an experiment, all independent, without consultation with other teams, just because of the way the organization's been architected from a process, organization, and technology perspective. Yeah. And then the decision-making process that you alluded to, coming from, I came from Accenture. We only made decisions with PowerPoints, moving to a culture where you make decisions based on a white paper, because what we found is that that's just the highest bandwidth way that you can make a decision. And so that's kind of some of the uniqueness. To the degree that can be replicated, I think it remains to be seen. But certainly, companies who are born in the Valley sort of by de facto operate that way. Right. But that's something that we've kind of transitioned to over the last decade or so.
Yeah, no, I think amazing lessons to be learned, from how do you structure an organization to adapt to change and ship out products faster. And